The morning light came in thin and pale through the single window of the small wooden house I had rented at the edge of Oakmere. I had been awake for an hour already, standing at the work table with a piece of oak I was measuring for a cabinet door. The village was quiet at this hour. Only the occasional creak of the old floorboards under my feet and the soft rasp of the measuring tape breaking the stillness. I liked it that way. Quiet suited me now. I had left Ernwick 3 weeks earlier. The city had felt too loud after everything ended with Elena. She had wanted someone with clearer plans, someone who would climb toward titles and stone houses instead of staying content with wood and simple work. I had not argued much. There was no point. I packed what little I needed, took the first wagon heading toward the border villages, and found this place. A modest house with a leaking gutter I had not fixed yet and a backyard that ended at a tall wooden fence. On the other side of that fence stood another house, almost identical to mine. Between our 2 yards grew one enormous oak tree, its trunk straddling the property line as if it had decided long ago that borders were suggestions. I was marking a cut on the wood when I heard the voice. "Hey, is anyone down there?" It came from above, clear but strained. I paused, listening. At first I thought it might be a child playing in the tree, though the sound was too low for that. A moment later it came again, sharper this time. "Hello? Can you hear me?" I set the measuring tape down and stepped out through the back door. The grass was still damp from last night's rain. I looked up into the spreading branches of the oak. About 3 body lengths above the ground, tangled among the thicker limbs, was a woman. An orc woman. She clung to the trunk with one arm, while her other hand held a struggling calico cat against her chest. Her black hair had come loose and caught on smaller branches. A gray cloak was snagged on a broken twig behind her. One of her boots had slipped off and lay on the grass below. She looked down at me, yellow-green eyes wide. Even from here I could see the tension in her shoulders. She was tall, broad through the frame in the way orc women often were, but the way she held herself told me she was trying very hard not to panic. I moved closer until I stood directly beneath her. "Are you planning to jump?" I called up. She shifted her grip on the cat, who meowed in protest. "Only if you plan to catch me." I glanced at the distance. It was high enough to hurt if she landed wrong, but not so high that it was impossible. The grass was soft from the rain. "Jump," I said. I'll catch you. Trust me." She stared at me for a long moment. A leaf drifted down and landed on her shoulder. She brushed it off with her chin. "I'm heavy," she said. Her voice carried a faint accent, the kind that rolled certain sounds longer than others. "And I'm holding this demon of a cat. Use both hands." "I will." She took one deep breath, tightened her hold on the cat, and let go of the branch. For a second, she seemed to fall in slow motion. Then the weight hit me full in the chest and arms. My knees buckled. We went down together onto the wet grass in a tangle of limbs and leaves. The impact knocked the air from my lungs. The cat let out a yowl of pure outrage the moment its paws touched the ground and bolted toward the fence, vanishing into the bushes on the other side. She ended up half on top of me, one of her knees beside my hip, her hair fallen across my face. It smelled of crushed leaves and damp earth. Her cloak had come loose and draped over both of us. For a few heartbeats, neither of us moved. I could feel her breathing hard against my chest. My own heart was hammering for reasons that had nothing to do with the fall. She lifted her head. Our faces were very close. Her eyes searched mine, surprise and something like relief flickering across them. Then, unexpectedly, she laughed. It was a low, genuine sound, not forced or polite. It made something tight in my chest loosen, without my permission. "You actually caught me," she said. "I also fell," I answered. My voice came out rougher than I intended. "I'm not sure that counts as success." She pushed herself up carefully, bracing one hand on the grass beside my head. Strands of her hair still brushed my cheek. She sat back on her heels and looked at me properly for the first time. I did the same. Up close, her skin had a faint green undertone, like new leaves in shadow. There was a small scratch on her cheek from a branch. She wiped at it absently. I sat up. My shirt was soaked through at the back. Hers was no better. We both looked ridiculous. She stood first and offered me her hand. I took it. Her grip was strong and warm. She pulled me to my feet with surprising ease. For a moment, we stood facing each other in the small space between our 2 yards. The cat had not reappeared. "I should check on Pudding," she said, glancing toward the fence. "He will probably sulk for days after this." "Pudding?" "My cat." the one who just abandoned me without a second thought. She shook her head, but there was fondness in it. Then she looked back at me. I live next door. I moved in a few days ago. I have seen you working in your yard. I nodded. I had noticed her too, carrying boxes and a few pieces of simple furniture, always alone except for the cat. We had not spoken until now. She hesitated, then spoke again. You did not have to help. Most people would have walked away or called the village guard. I was already here, I said. It was the simplest truth I could offer. A small smile touched her mouth. She brushed more leaves from her cloak. Still, I owe you something for not letting me break my neck, or at least for trying. You do not owe me anything. I want to, she said. Her tone was quiet but certain. Come over tonight. For dinner. Nothing fancy. Just food and a roof that is not trying to drop branches on you. I should have said no. I had come here to keep things simple. No complications. No new people who might decide I was not enough. But she was looking at me without expectation. Only a kind of steady honesty that made refusal feel heavier than acceptance. All right, I heard myself say. She nodded once as if that settled something. My name is Lyria Thornbrook. And you are... Jaren, I answered after a small pause. Jaren Vale. Jaren Vale, she repeated, testing the sound. Then she gave another small smile. Try not to fall off any more trees before tonight, Jaren Vale. She turned and walked toward the fence. There was a small gate I had not noticed before. She pushed it open, stepped through, and disappeared into her own yard. A moment later, I heard her calling softly for the cat. I stayed where I was, standing in the damp grass between our two houses. My shirt clung to my back. There were leaves stuck to my sleeves. The oak tree above us swayed gently in the morning breeze as if nothing unusual had happened. I had not planned on meeting anyone. I had not planned on catching anyone. Yet here I was, heart still beating too fast, already wondering what she would cook and whether I should bring something. The thought felt strange and oddly light at the same time. I turned and walked back toward my door. Behind me, the oak tree stood silent and old, its branches holding the memory of the morning in the way old trees do. I did not know yet that this single fall would change more than I had allowed myself to change in a very long time. That evening, I stood in front of my own door for longer than I should have, brushing sawdust from my shirt and wondering whether I should bring something. I had nothing worth offering. In the end, I simply washed my hands, changed into a cleaner shirt, and walked through the small gate between our yards. Her house looked almost the same as mine from the outside, yet the moment I stepped onto her porch, I felt the difference. A clay pot of small white flowers sat on the windowsill. A wreath of dried herbs hung on the door. When she opened it, the smell of warm bread and something savory drifted out to meet me. You came, she said. There was a trace of surprise in her voice, as if she had half expected me to change my mind. I said I would. She stepped back to let me in. Inside, the house felt lived in. A low fire crackled in the hearth. The table was set with 2 bowls, 2 plates, and a single candle that had already been lit. Everything was simple, but nothing felt empty. Sit, she said. It is nothing special, just what I had. She brought out a pot of thick tomato soup that smelled of forest herbs, a round of dark bread still warm from the oven, and slices of goat cheese that had been grilled until the edges turned golden. There was also a small pitcher of warm apple cider and a loaf of herb bread cooling on the counter. She moved around the small kitchen with quiet efficiency, as if she had done this many times for herself and was only now remembering how to do it for someone else. We ate slowly. At first, the conversation stayed light. She asked about the cabinet I had been working on that morning. I asked about the cat. Pudding, it turned out, had returned an hour after the fall, acting as though nothing had happened and demanding food. Then the talk drifted deeper without either of us forcing it. Lyria told me she had once taught drawing to orc children in the mountain villages. After the last border conflict, the small school had been closed. She had packed what little she owned and come south, looking for somewhere quiet where she could grow things and write small books about slow living and forest herbs. Oakmere had felt far enough from the memories, and the rent had been low enough that she could manage on her own. I listened without interrupting. When she finished, I found myself telling her about Dernwick and about Elena. I did not go into every detail, but I told her the part that still sat inside me like a knot. She wanted someone who knew where he was going, I said. Someone with plans that reached further than the next piece of furniture. I never had those plans. I still do not. Lyria did not offer pity. She only nodded once, as if she understood something I had not said out loud. Perhaps she did not understand that a future can also be built from wood, she said quietly. One joint at a time. The words settled between us. I had no answer for them, so I simply took another spoonful of soup and let the warmth spread through my chest. After the meal, we moved to the 2 chairs near the fire. Pudding appeared from wherever he had been hiding and jumped onto my lap without ceremony, circling twice before settling with his chin on my knee. His weight was solid and warm. I rested a hand on his back without thinking. Lyria watched the cat, a small smile at the corner of her mouth. He chooses people faster than I do, she said. I looked at her. Do you find it hard to trust people? She was quiet for a moment, staring into the flames. I trusted the wrong ones once, she answered. After that, I learned how to live alone. It was simpler. The fire popped. Outside, the wind moved through the oak tree, making the branches creak softly. I thought about my own empty house on the other side of the fence and about how many nights I had sat in silence there, telling myself silence was enough. Lyria turned her head and looked at me directly. This morning, she said, I did not expect anyone to actually catch me. I met her eyes. I did not expect to want to catch anyone. The words came out heavier than I had meant them to. For a long moment, neither of us looked away. Something shifted in the space between our chairs, quiet but unmistakable. It was not a declaration. It was only the truth, spoken plainly. She did not smile, but her expression softened. She reached down and scratched Pudding behind the ear. When it was time for me to leave, she walked me to the door. Before I stepped outside, she handed me a small wooden box, wrapped in a clean cloth. Her biscuits, she said, for breakfast, or for the middle of the night if you are the kind of person who gets hungry then. I took the box. Our fingers brushed for a second. Will you have time for tea tomorrow? She asked. I should have checked the work I had promised to finish. Instead, I answered without hesitation. Yes. She nodded, as if that was all she needed to hear. Then she closed the door gently behind me. I walked back across the short distance between our houses. The night air was cool against my face. When I stepped inside my own door, the house looked exactly as I had left it. The half-finished cabinet still stood on the work table. The floor still creaked in the same places, yet something felt different. The silence no longer pressed quite so heavily against my ribs. I set the box of biscuits on the table and stood there for a while, listening to the faint sound of the wind in the oak tree. For the first time in many months, I found myself looking forward to the morning, not because of the work that waited, but because I would see her again. I did not know what any of it meant yet. I only knew that the cold I had carried with me since leaving Durnwick had begun very slightly to ease. The days that followed settled into a rhythm neither of us had planned. Each morning, I would step onto my porch and find something waiting on the wooden rail. A small handful of wild blueberries wrapped in a cloth, a warm piece of bread still soft from the oven, or once, a single pressed leaf with a few words scratched on it in careful handwriting. Do not burn your breakfast again. I had smiled despite myself. I kept burning the bread anyway. On the third morning, I sent a small piece of charred wood back across the fence with a note of my own. A glorious failure. From the other side of the yard, I heard her laugh, low and unrestrained, carrying over the fence like it belonged there. I began helping her with the house. It started small. The storage shed door stuck every time it rained, and she mentioned it once while we were standing near the fence. The next afternoon, I brought my tools and fixed the hinges. She tried to pay me with a bowl of pumpkin soup. I accepted it because refusing felt more awkward than taking it. After that, other things appeared. A loose shelf in her kitchen, a leak in the chicken coop roof, a section of garden fence that had begun to lean. I fixed them one by one on evenings when the light was still good. She always returned the favor with food, bean soup, ginger tea, herb bread, and I never argued. One afternoon, she asked if I would help her repaint the garden shed. The old paint had peeled in long strips, and she wanted something cleaner. We mixed red earth with white lime until we had a soft, warm color that reminded me of late summer. She worked on one wall while I worked on the other. For a while, the only sounds were the brushes moving and the occasional call of a bird in the oak tree above us. Then the rain came without warning. It started as a few heavy drops and quickly turned into a steady downpour. We ran for her kitchen door, laughing and half-drenched by the time we reached it. Inside, water dripped from our hair and clothes. A streak of paint had somehow found its way onto my cheek. She noticed it before I did. "Hold still," she said. She took a clean cloth from the counter and wiped the mark away. Her fingers lingered a moment longer than necessary against my skin. When I looked at her, she was already looking back. Neither of us moved. The rain drummed steadily on the roof. Something in the air between us had shifted, quiet but certain, like a door that had been left ajar for weeks and was now opening a little wider. After that evening, the silences between us felt different. They were no longer empty. They held weight. One night we sat by her fire again, sharing the last of the herb bread. She had been quiet for a while, staring into the flames. Then she spoke, without looking at me. I used to believe that living alone was peaceful. I waited. "Now I think peace might be having someone nearby and not needing to guard yourself," she said. The words landed softly but stayed. I thought about the empty chair in my own house and about how many nights I had told myself that solitude was safer. I did not answer her right away. I was afraid that if I spoke, I would admit something I was not ready to name because the truth was beginning to frighten me. I had left Dernwick to avoid this exact feeling. I had told myself I would keep things simple, that I would not let anyone close enough to decide I was not enough. Yet here I was, fixing her shed and eating her bread and thinking about her laugh when I was supposed to be working. The thought that she might one day look at me the way Elena had, disappointed, wanting more than what I could offer, made something in my chest tighten. So I began to pull back. For 2 days, I stayed inside when I saw her in the yard. I told myself I was busy with a large order for the village. On the third morning, there was no bread on my porch, no note. The absence felt louder than any words. That evening I heard her voice from the other side of the fence. "Are you avoiding me?" I stepped out onto my porch. She stood near the gate, arms crossed loosely, watching me with those clear yellow-green eyes. "No," I said. She tilted her head slightly. "You are a terrible liar, Jaren Vale." I exhaled and looked down at my hands. They still carried traces of sawdust. "I am not good at keeping people," I said finally. "I have learned that the hard way." She was quiet for a long moment. The wind moved through the oak leaves above us. "Then do not try to keep me," she answered. Her voice was calm, without anger. "Just do not push me away on purpose." The simplicity of it caught me off guard. I had no reply ready. She did not wait for one. She turned and walked back toward her door, leaving the gate between our yards open as it had been for days. That night she did not invite me over. Instead, when I stepped onto my porch the next morning, I found a single small cake wrapped in cloth. Resting on top of it was a narrow strip of paper with only a few words written in her careful hand. "I am still here, on the other side of the fence." I stood there holding the paper for a long time, the cake growing cool in my other hand. The words were not a demand. They were not even a question. They were simply a statement of fact, offered without pressure. And that was when I understood something I had been trying not to see. If I kept stepping back, if I let the old fear win, I would lose the one good thing that had found its way into my life since I left Dernwick. The fall from the tree had been an accident. What came after had not been. Every shared meal, every repaired hinge, every quiet evening by the fire had been a choice, and I was close to choosing fear instead of her. I folded the paper carefully and slipped it into my pocket. Then I looked across the fence toward her house. The light was on in her kitchen. I could see the faint shape of her moving inside. For the first time in days, I did not turn away. The storm arrived without warning that night. I had been working late at the table, the lamp casting a small circle of light over the half-finished joints of a chair, when the wind began to slam against the shutters. Rain followed soon after, heavy and relentless, drumming on the roof until the sound filled the entire house. I tried to keep working, but my eyes kept drifting toward the window that faced her yard. Her house was completely dark. I set the chisel down. The gate between our yards had been left open earlier in the day, and now the wind was swinging it back and forth with a sharp, lonely creak. I could not see any movement through the rain-streaked glass. Pudding usually appeared on her porch at dusk, even in bad weather, but there was no small shape moving in the shadows. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. I pulled on my coat, lit the old oil lamp I kept by the door, and stepped outside. The rain hit me at once, cold and sharp. I crossed the short distance to her gate and called her name. The wind tore the sound away almost immediately. I walked around the side of her house, holding the lamp high, checking the garden and the shed. The door to the chicken coop had blown open. Inside, the birds were huddled and restless, no sign of her. I went to her front door and knocked hard. Nothing. I tried the handle. It turned. The house was empty and cold. A single cup of tea sat on the kitchen table, untouched and long since gone cold. Her cloak was missing from the hook by the door. I stood in the middle of her kitchen, water dripping from my coat onto the floor, and felt something close to panic rise in my chest. The last time I had seen her was that morning when she left a small bunch of rosemary on my porch. She had not said she was going anywhere. She had not looked unwell. Looked. I went back outside and searched the yard again, calling her name into the storm until my voice grew hoarse. The rain soaked through my coat and shirt. My boots sank into the softening ground. Every shadow looked like it might be her until the light from the lamp showed it was only a bush or the fence post. Nearly an hour passed. I had begun to consider going into the village for help when I heard the sound of wheels on the muddy road. A cart pulled by a single-tired horse stopped in front of her house. The driver helped someone down. Even through the rain and the dark, I recognized the shape of her shoulders. "Lyria!" I ran toward her. She turned at the sound of my voice. Her face was pale and drawn, her hair plastered to her head. She wore a simple traveling cloak that was heavy with water. A strip of white cloth was tied around one wrist, the kind the healers used when someone had been sitting vigil for too long. She looked at me as if she could not quite believe I was there. "Jaren," she said. Her voice was rough. "What are you doing out in this?" I reached her in a few strides. "Where have you been? I thought—" I stopped myself. The words sounded too raw even to my own ears. She glanced at the cart driver, who was already turning the horse around. "My mother fell ill. A messenger came this afternoon. I had to go." I did not ask more questions. She looked exhausted, the kind of exhaustion that went deeper than the body. I took her arm gently and guided her toward her own door. She did not pull away. Inside, I lit the fire while she stood dripping on the threshold. Pudding appeared from under the table, meowing once in complaint before pressing himself against her legs. She reached down and touched the top of his head, but her hand trembled. I put water on to boil and found the jar of dried ginger she kept on the shelf. While the tea steeped, I brought a clean towel and a dry blanket from the chest near the hearth. She had not moved much. She stood in the middle of the room, as if she had forgotten how to sit down. I guided her to the chair closest to the fire. She let me. When I handed her the mug of hot ginger tea, her fingers closed around it slowly. For a long while she said nothing. The only sounds were the fire and the rain against the windows. Then, very quietly, she spoke. "I sat in the healing house for hours and realized I am still afraid of losing people the way I was when I was younger." I pulled the other chair closer and sat facing her. I did not offer empty comfort. I simply stayed. She looked into the fire. "I have always told myself that living alone was safer, that if I needed no one, then no one could leave me. But tonight, when the messenger came, I understood that I had only been pretending to be fine with it." Her voice cracked on the last word. She set the mug down and covered her face with both hands. It was the first time I had seen her cry. The sound was small and broken, almost lost beneath the storm. I reached across the space between us and took one of her hands. She did not pull away. Her fingers were cold. I held them between both of mine until some of the warmth from the fire passed into them. "I am afraid too," I said. She lowered her hands and looked at me. Her eyes were red but steady. "I left the city because I was afraid of not being enough for someone," I continued. "I came here thinking I could keep everything simple. Then you fell out of that tree and I caught you, and now I am more frightened of going back to how things were before than I am of anything else." She was quiet for a moment. Then she asked, in a voice so soft I almost missed it, "Do you still mean what you said that morning?" I knew exactly which morning she meant. "Every time you jump," I answered, "I will catch you." She let out a breath that might have been a laugh or a sob. Then she leaned forward and rested her head against my shoulder. It was not dramatic. There was no great declaration. She simply let herself rest there, her damp hair against my collar, her weight warm and real. I lifted my arm and placed it carefully around her, afraid that if I moved too quickly she might pull away. She did not. We stayed like that for a long time. The fire burned lower. The rain eased into a steady rhythm instead of a roar. Pudding climbed onto the arm of her chair and watched us with half-closed eyes, as if he had always known this would happen. At some point, her breathing slowed and deepened. She had fallen asleep against me, one hand still loosely holding the edge of my sleeve. I did not move. I sat there with her weight against my side and listened to the storm gradually spend itself outside. In the quiet that followed, I understood something I had been circling around for days. Catching someone when they fell was the easy part. It took only a moment and a pair of steady hands. Staying afterward, when the ground was uneven and the fear returned, that was the harder work. And I wanted to do it. Not because I owed her anything. Not because I was trying to prove I could be someone else in Sinsin, simply because the thought of her facing the dark alone again was no longer something I could accept. I stayed awake long after she had fallen asleep. The lamp burned low. Outside, the oak tree stood in the rain, its branches heavy but unbroken. Inside, for the first time since I had come to this village, the house next to mine no longer felt like a boundary I needed to keep. It felt like a place I might finally be willing to stay. The days after the storm felt different, though neither of us named the difference out loud. I stopped pretending I was too busy to cross the fence. She stopped leaving small gifts on my porch as if she were testing whether I would still accept them. Instead, we simply began moving through each other's days without ceremony. When she traveled to visit her mother for 2 days, I tended her garden and fed Pudding. When she returned, she left a covered pot of stew on my table with a note that said, "Only eat while it is warm." The gate between our yards stayed open. Pudding no longer chose one house over the other. He walked between them as though the fence had never existed. One late afternoon, she stood beneath the oak tree and looked at the patch of grass between our 2 houses. "This spot needs a bench," she said. I came to stand beside her. "For one person or 2? She glanced at me, the corner of her mouth lifting. 2. And 1 cat, who believes he is royalty." I went inside, found a scrap of wood, and sketched a simple design right there on the surface. A long cedar bench with a low back, wide enough for 2 people to sit close without crowding, and sturdy enough that it would not shift under her weight. She watched over my shoulder without speaking. When I finished, she only nodded once. We built it together over the next 2 evenings. I cut the wood while she sanded the surfaces smooth with steady, patient strokes. She carved a small oak leaf into the right armrest, the lines clean and simple. On the left armrest, I carved a tiny, smug-looking cat with its head lifted. Exactly the way Pudding sat when he believed the world existed for his comfort. Neither of us commented on the carvings. We simply worked until the light faded and the smell of fresh cedar clung to our hands. While I planned the seat, she said almost casually, "If this bench collapses the first time we sit on it, you will have to catch both me and Pudding." I did not look up. "I will use both hands," she laughed, low and warm, and the sound settled somewhere behind my ribs the way her laugh always did now. We finished as the sun dropped behind the trees. The bench stood solid and straight beneath the oak. We carried out 2 mugs of ginger tea, the last of the herb biscuits, and an old wool blanket. Pudding appeared as though summoned, leapt onto the middle of the seat, turned 3 times, and stretched out with the air of someone who had been waiting for this exact piece of furniture his entire life. Lyria sat on one side. I sat on the other. She leaned back until her shoulder rested against mine. I placed my arm along the back of the bench, my fingers brushing her shoulder. For a while we drank the tea in silence and watched the last light move across the grass. Then she spoke. "I used to believe that being alone was freedom." I waited. "Now I think that being able to explain your life to the right person is also a kind of freedom," she said. Her voice was quiet, almost thoughtful. "It feels less like giving something up and more like finally setting it down somewhere safe." I looked at the bench beneath us, at the carvings we had made without needing to discuss them. "I have no 5-year plan," I said. "No grand ambitions, no castle waiting somewhere. I never have." She turned her head slightly so she could see my face. "Good. I do not need a castle. I need mornings with tea, evenings with someone sitting beside me, and a bench that will not fall apart. The words were simple. They asked for nothing dramatic. Yet they settled into the space between us with more weight than any promise I had ever been given. When the light was nearly gone, we carried the empty mugs back inside. At her door, she stopped and turned to face me. She did not invite me in with food or tea or any of the careful phrases we had used before. She simply looked at me for a long moment and asked one quiet word. "Stay?" I stepped closer. I took her hand, the same hand I had held the night of the storm, and answered without hesitation. "I have been staying since the day you jumped." She studied my face as if she were making certain I meant it. Then she rose slightly on her toes and kissed me. It was not hurried. It was not uncertain. It was only the natural next step after everything that had already been said without words. When she drew back, her forehead rested against mine for a breath. Putting me out once from inside, impatient for his dinner, and the ordinary sound made us both smile. I stayed that night. In the weeks that followed, the bench became part of our days. We sat there in the mornings when the air was cool and in the evenings when the light turned gold. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we did not. Pudding always claimed the center. The oak tree above us continued its slow, steady growth, its roots reaching under both our houses as though it had known from the beginning that the line between them was never meant to stay closed. I had come to Oakmere believing that the safest thing was to keep my hands empty and my doors closed. Then a woman fell out of a tree while holding a cat, and I caught her without thinking. What happened afterward was not a single moment of rescue. It was 100 small choices, fixing a hinge, sharing bread, leaving a gate open, carving a cat into wood, and deciding again and again to remain after the fall had already ended. She had asked me once if I would still catch her. I had answered that I would. What I had not understood then was that catching her had been the easy part. The harder, better work was learning how to stay once she was safely on the ground, and building, together, a place where neither of us would have to fall alone again.